Oh, curb your enthusiasm for just a moment. Thank you. Hope you all had a lovely break and you're all full of enthusiasm and positivity. Moving on to item 2, which is the apologies, and I don't have any, and we've got more attendees than we usually have, so welcome. Declarations of interest. We had a late item brought to me right this moment, so if we, Councillor Guyton, did you have a...
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I do. I wish to make a statement in relation to a complaint received by Environment Southland about me. I sent emails from my council email account signing off as a councillor, when in fact I was emailing on a personal matter. This was inappropriate and unreservedly for this era of judgment.
Thank you, Councillor.
And with that, I'll leave.
Would you like to give a paper copy of that to the Secretary, and then when you don't, there's no room for...
Thank you very much.
You're up.
Before Robert goes, thank you, Robert, for that very clear statement. And I think this is a timely reminder to us all when we're in a leadership role that we have to be careful what we do. And I think it's also indicates we actually probably need to update our code of conduct so it is actually up to date and user friendly. So thank you for that statement.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, bringing the code of conduct into the digital age is complex, so thanks for kicking that off. Okay, moving on to public forums. I haven't been made aware of any.
Madam Chair, I was just picking up on an earlier comment we made last year. We were going to think about not necessarily public forum, but people who could actually add value to this committee, people who would actually give us understanding background, understanding the complexities of some of the things that relate to this committee. It would be good if we could actually think about who that could be and timing them in so that we're proactive in seeking advice and not just reactive to the community. So I just wonder whether we should think about that, not necessarily right now, but think about that going forward, and actually we may be able to get some value from the section of the agenda that we don't have a lot of activity on.
Thank you. Yes, that's a good reminder. And we will, perhaps in an upcoming workshop, we can spend 10 or 15 minutes brainstorming some ideas on that and split them into the risk and finance portfolios so that they're in the right place. Thanks, Councillor. Moving on to the confirmation of minutes. Thank you. 19th of November. Any corrections required? Thank you, Chairman Horrell. Seconded Councillor McPhail. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. And the minutes from the Thursday, the 26th of November. Similarly, any corrections or anomalies?
Yes, Madam Chair, I've seconded an apology, so I must have been there and not on the list.
Ooh, that's tricky. So you were there?
I was there.
Thank you, we'll get that sorted. Anything else? Great. Somebody like to move that, please? Thank you, Councillor Beard. Chairman Horrell, any further questions?
Yes, I just have one, if that's okay, and there was, I wasn't there, but council's agreed to seek advice from me, which is very nice. You haven't. Is there anything I can help with? This was under the public forum. Is this what you were perhaps referring to before, Lloyd?
Yes.
Under the public forum petitions and deputations, you also discussed about invitations to people, and then there was a suggestion that you talk to me. Can I just reflect nobody has, which is not me being grumpy at all, but actually just reflecting happy to provide that advice if somebody wants to. Perhaps it's with you, I don't know.
Yeah, well perhaps we can have a wee talk about, because you'll know the right people.
Yes, I've been hard to get hold of in the last month, so I don't blame you if you haven't spoken to me.
Thanks. We have mover and seconder. Motion, all those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Right. Any questions? I haven't had any presented. Councillors' reports? Me neither. So moving on to item 9, which is the first item is the insurance update.
And we've got Neil Salmon from Salmon Associates and Tony Hawkins, the finance manager, here to talk through.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'll kick off. So just to provide a bit of background, this item came up in the last risk meeting of OPAC. The question was asked, and I guess Council had heard various aspects about the complexity of the infrastructure insurance market as we're working through our claims relating to the floods. And the questions were asked about can Council be given a succinct overview, and then it leads into then understanding what the insurance market looks like and how it functions as to what is the purpose of the disaster reserve. So I've intended or thought here to provide as succinct an overview as I can, but there are complexities in it, and then to sort of feed into what I believe this means for the disaster reserves, and then there's a whole question around, okay, what does that mean for Council, which Tony will then sort of talk to. So just to work through, as it's been covered off in the past, we presently use commercial insurers. We've got an insurance broker being Aon, and they underwrite our insurance with the London markets. We're part of a South Island collective that's managed by Aon, so our infrastructure insurance is operated through there. That covers 40% of our asset cover. The balance is covered off by NEMA or central government, and they pay 60% of claims. Now, part of the complexity comes from the fact that they both have completely different rules with regards to what they cover. So there is the challenge when running the claim is that you're not missing stuff. Stuff's not slipping through the respective insurance covers. But so we can go to the attachments, because I think the attachments sort of, just say it's my attempt to try and simplify this. So with Aon, we have 67 million of assets specified. Within that, we have a sub-limit of 35 million. Now, what that sub-limit means is that whilst we've got 67 million, we expect that on any one claim, it is unlikely that all of those assets will be fully damaged. So we've got a sub-limit or a maximum probable loss for another term of 35 million, saying that, look, on a major event, and we're probably not talking flood events, we're probably talking earthquake events, that up to almost half of those assets might be damaged. We also have a policy deductible, or other terms would be an excess of 25,000. Now, there is a chance that due to our recent claim that might be revisited. We have had conversations with Aon about that. There is no indication that it's going to change at this present point in time, but it did happen for other councils when they'd made claims. The insurers came back and said, look, we will insure you again, but we're going to change the excess.
250,000, not 25.
Yeah, so 250,000. Yeah. The policy also covers us off for unspecified assets up to 250,000. So if you think the specified asset list is essentially our fixed asset register, there are some assets which or work that we've done that we don't have in the fixed asset register, and there are things like rock work and so forth that we haven't capitalised. So within a claim, we can claim up to $250,000 worth of unspecified assets, i.e. stuff that we haven't identified to the insurers. The policy also covers our staff costs relating to repairs, and our staff costs or any claims preparation costs is covered. Just a point there, specified assets can include rock work, tied trees and so forth. Although, as I say, our council approach is not to capitalise rock work, and to be fair, it's not significantly damaged in the case of a flood event anyway. But it is covered up to 25k within the 250k within the unspecified assets. So NEMA, National Emergency Management Agency, or central government, they fund 60% of their terminology eligible recovery costs. Now they don't have a limit, and their list is based on, or their criteria is based on man-made assets or changes. So they do, as a matter of course, cover all of the things, all of the work that we've done. They cover rock work, they cover the lot. Their deductible is based on 402% of council's net rateable value, which for us is 660,000. They do not cover staff costs or claim preparation costs. And as a side, they do cover response costs, which are predominantly the welfare. So if you think in terms of a flood incident, we have a whole lot of costs in terms of the response to claim, mitigation work in terms of sandbagging and everything. The NEMA, they do cover off the welfare costs to 100%. The cost mitigation and or the restoration stuff or recovery stuff is 60%. So apples and oranges to some extent. Bringing it together just to highlight what our overall deductible is. If you look at the deductible calculation, maybe start from the bottom. I guess the point being that from naught, incident from 0 to 250,000, there is no recovery. We don't get anything from Aon. We don't get anything from NEMA. From 250 up to 660. We get 40% from Aon, nothing from NEMA, so we're getting 164. So up to 660, our total claim is 164. Hence, our deductible is essentially about $496,000 or circa 500k. So we've sort of talked about deductible of 500k, but that's how it's calculated. Different rules for different sides. So then, flowing on from that as to what does that mean to us with regards to our self-insurance or our disaster reserves. The second part there, I've started to set it out in terms of council holds disaster reserves to cover costs that it may incur as a result of a disaster. Obvious. That covers off the Aon deductible, which is $100,000. The NEMA deductible, which is $396,000. And then it covers uninsured assets not specified on the Aon policy. So if you recall, there was an ability to claim unspecified assets up to $250,000 on Aon. Anything over and above that would be covered off by the disaster reserves. It will cover off any asset betterment, and so neither Aon nor NEMA will cover betterment. And if you think if we've had an incident and we've had damage to our assets, we may look at that time to improve those assets. It may be economic to do so. None of that is obviously going to be covered off through neither of the insurance, the insurance or the NEMA policy. So any things that we may do at that time that would better the function of the asset would be on us. So hence there's a need to consider and claim that. And any additional work caused by the event, i.e. new rock work, obviously that would be, the disaster reserve would be looked at rather than it's not going to come through from any insurance policy. So in essence, when you look at that, that's what our disaster reserves are set to cover. In the table above, disaster reserves table, you can see what we're currently holding. Any questions on that? I think Ben Tane's going to talk to a little bit more about, following on from that as to what it might mean for us.
Great. We've got Lloyd and Bruce at this point. Councillor McKellen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It might be more in Tane's area, but when I looked at this, I thought that's fair enough. We've got two insurers, so we need to manage that. I need to understand where one starts and one stops. because we can't double insure, understand that. But out of that comes, what issues have we had that we see from the last claims that would say that we need to address? In other words, holes in our policy cover, or there are things that we could do better. Because by having the two, sometimes you miss the obvious, and we need to look back at how did that last February flood play out, and were there holes that we identified that needed to be sorted through the insurance, if any.
Yeah, so,
Because that would lead into either changing our policy, changing companies, or recovering something in a different way. So it comes down to risk. Where do we think we're going to be most exposed? So you may want to think about that than having something off the top of your head, but that was coming out of all those events. You find that, it's like my car insurance. Did my car insurance cover what it did? Was I happy with the excess? Was I happy with the company and its response time? Did I feel valued on the way through, and et cetera, et cetera? And I think I'm just raising that similar profile question to our two providers. And if we weren't happy with some of that stuff, then maybe we should look at addressing some of that. And I don't know the answer to that. I'm just asking the question, is there something we're not happy with, or thought we could do better, or we missed something completely and we need to address it?
I think it'd be fair to say, Councillor, that having COVID in the middle of it certainly delayed it and made it a very long process in the claims. With Aon having to go through New Zealand to London, and London not being in a very good place in the last 12 months, and it certainly slowed down the process. With COVID happening on top of it as well for claims in New Zealand through NEMA, we were pushed back down through the list. Not necessarily purposely, but they took it. COVID became the next emergency after the flood emergency. So there are a number of learnings, and one of them is this takes an awful lot of administration. There's an awful lot of detailed work to be done. There's learnings in the admin, there's learnings in resourcing the catchment team to be able to carry on to do the work and actually make the claims as well. In terms of the insurance, I think we did not end up with many arguments about what was to be claimed or not at all. The learning for me is, and looking back over previous notes, is that only 50% of the total cost was actually against insurable assets. So 50% approximately of the work to be done as a result of the flood was what we would call river edge work, when large parts of land were seriously affected that had to have new. We just leave that, please. Thank you. It's on quiet. Had to have remedial work done. Now we're going into the beginning of the season for repair work, and we were able to divert that budget to that. When I look back at some previous reports, some very detailed reports done by the catchment team in 2003 and 4, they actually went through a process of what would happen if that flood had happened at the end of the season. Could we carry it into the next year's budget? What would happen? So this kind of thing is exactly what has happened in the past, that the uninsured work is taken into the budget for the next season. It does and can cause problems there, of course, because they had a list of work to do as well. That previous piece of work was very detailed, as I said, and even included the method you take your uninsured work from retained earnings that are held by catchment first, and then from the disaster reserve. So there's plenty of prior work being done on this, and following on from what Neil's saying, I think I've recommended to exec that take this opportunity and build on it and review the last one done was 2014, the last serious review that was put to the catchment groups on where are we at with insurance and assets and disaster reserves and how are we currently placed. When we look at the 2003 work, it's really interesting in that they talk about increasing climate effect damage, increasing premiums, pressure from insurance companies. 2003, it's quite interesting to read. We are in the same place. We could expect more and more pressure from insurance providers. There's 2 regional councils who've advised us at a forum that they can't get insurance for forest fires now. Not every council in New Zealand has been able to insure their flood assets other than through NEMA. So those are things to consider again as as separate pieces of work. That's my suggestion. And reviewing what we've learned, the learnings from this one.
So, and a couple of comments from me, Lloyd. I think there are, so just keep in mind that Aon and NEMA sit side by side. It's not, one does 60, one does 40. So, Aon's policy is very much the commercial policy, but understanding that 60% of the cost is covered by central government. So there's not a lot of, obviously, we don't have a lot of ability to impact the funding from NEMA. The area where we could have review, or we could review with Aon, and I don't think it's been a problem, but again, it's the areas of where we can ask the questions, is with regards to our specified assets. Have we got that right? And as I said, we don't capitalise rock work, and I think I don't believe that there was in the flood event that there was a lot of damage to rock work. So gut feel probably the right thing not to insure it, but that we could review our specified asset list. And the other thing that we could review is the excess or the deductible. And we did have a conversation because our premiums did go up to some extent. So we had a conversation with the broker to say, well, look, if we were to review our excess, would we get some reduction in the premium? And if we took the excess from 250,000 up to 500,000, there wouldn't be a great deal of movement. So then the question is, whether or not we are comfortable taking it up. And again, we have to understand the impact of it in terms of on the premium, and then review and consider the impact on us and our reserves. But there is a question around, have we got that excess right, and is there benefit to move that up? Which means us taking on the responsibility and self-insurance for, and so if you think in terms of the frequency curve, you've got a lot of little occurrences, and then you've got your big occurrences which you've got insurers for. So it would be us then using the reserves and self-insuring on those sort of smaller, more frequent events, which carries a risk, of course.
Bruce?
Well, thank you. And partly, Neil, your good explanations help me here, which is how do you determine the level of the reserves? So I was trying to remember, when was the Matara flood? February. We haven't dipped into the reserves. And there's you're just explaining the mechanics, and I get the point that there must be in our claims a level of unrecovered, that portion of the deductible which we can't claim. Yet there's nothing come out of the Matara now. I mean, cool, we may have found other funds to cover it, but I was just wondering, I was just interested actually how we understand, when you've explained the balance of the reserve, how we get it, but I just was interested we haven't this year tapped it, if you will, when in fact we had a flood. So that was the other thing. The only other comment you may have a response to that by Neil or Tanya. I looked at the views of the affected parties. I think this is something which actually would be valuable for us to have in mind when we deal with our LTP, and also with the annual report, that actually we've asked questions, and thank you, we better understand how our insurances work. I think it's pretty important the community know as well. So I'll leave it as an open statement, but I think the LTP would do well to have a short section dealing with actually how we cover or manage our risk, this sort of disaster risk.
Thanks, Bruce. Nicole?
Bruce sort of stole half my question, but that's good, Bruce, we're on the same wavelength.
I see you don't need me.
I'm looking at those reserves, and the half of the wire which is going down fractionally, so there's almost $500,000 not recoverable. So where do we recover that? It sounds like most of it's come through the works budget. Obviously the disaster reserve that we call on first is replenished by some of the funding that's coming in. But my question is, are we actually over-insured? In my memory, we've never actually touched those reserves. They're still climbing. We've got 2 lots of insurance and a disaster reserve for the initial thing. But if the work budgets are actually covering it, maybe we could actually have maybe it's worth looking at how much we would save by going up to 400,000 or something like that. It's just interesting.
If I can just respond, I think it's worth so we should be informed. So we need to do the work so then we understand the possibility and the potential benefit. The only thing I would say with regards to when we look at the disaster reserves is to err on the side of caution. And whilst it's been bouncing around since when I started at ES, there was always conversation that NEMA was going to review their support policy. So, at the present point in time, they're covering that 60-40. There have been murmurs, and as I say, they've been around for a long time, but there have been murmurs that they're going to change their philosophy, and it's more likely that we would have to self-insure or use commercial insurers up to a point, and then NEMA will come in over top and cover 100% of whatever is over top of that. So it's likely that there may be more responsibility on us and our commercial insurers for that lower level stuff. And the feedback that we get from Aon is that if you'll all recall or all be aware that there are a significant number of events occurring worldwide. So the reinsurers, the market is under pressure, and when Aon are going to the London market to talk to the reinsurers, the number there that are interested in this space are getting less and less. So there are risks. And it's a little bit like what Tony said, it's a bit of Groundhog Day. So 2003, and I think it was around then that the council was trying to get insurance of its infrastructure assets, but there just wasn't commercial insurance available, and that's when LAP was established. Because as a collective, local government said, look, we need to be able to insure some of these assets. So a mutual fund was established so that we all sort of self-insured each other. There are pressures at the present point in time on the international market for this insurance. So wouldn't try and preempt anything, but I'd be cautious about anything that would be changing our approach to those disaster reserves, accepting that we should be asking the question and understand if we change our excess from here to here to here, what will that do to the premium? I think it's a very pertinent question to be asking.
I guess supplementary question on that: do we have the order right? At the moment, we go to the operating budget for the year. So we're not actually touching these. Maybe it should be the other way around. It might mean you can do a bit more work the following year, but policy at the moment is you go for your reserves, but if you've got money in the budget, we use that first. Is that the right hierarchy, I guess, is the other question I'm asking.
Can I answer that? I might have misled you when I was, not have been as clear as I could. The uninsured work comes from the works budget. The insured work has a premium, an excess of 500,000, as Neil's alluded to. That excess could come from the disaster reserves, but the recommendation in the earlier work was if there's money in the retained earnings and the carry forwards, that the excess would come from that. So there's been a lot of question in the past as how much carry forward should each catchment have. And I was enlightened in reading the previous work, and they suggested 1 to 2 times your normal budget. And for the reason that they were using a very conservative go-to approach, was they would take the excess from their carry forward budgets, then they would take any others from their disaster reserves. So that's why the disaster reserves were not touched. They all had enough money. Now one of them had a carry forward that was nearly taken out with that, and we would have had to go to the disaster reserve, but for the most of them wasn't as significant. The other really interesting thing that came through was the variety of agreements we have in the catchments between the contribution and rate payers. Some contributed nothing, some contributed 100%, and others are on 70 and 60. And across the catchment, it's a huge variety. There was a significant amount of money came in, and some hundreds of thousands in the end from ratepayers for work that they contributed to as a result of flood. So I would just suggest that it's a good time to review all of that in light of the future. And while we're looking at 1 in a 100-year event that we could potentially, we only had it on 2 rivers, it wasn't across the whole region. And the engineer and the economist that did the earlier work did suggest that, there's going to be more than a 1 in a 100-year event. They will get bigger. So it's a great piece of work to do again.
Thanks, Tony. I've got Jeremy, Alan, and then Lloyd is having a second go.
Yep, no, everybody's answered my question, but I'd suggest, it was just around the disaster reserves, but it's already answered. Just in regards that when you're looking at the premiums as, of the assessors, is whether you can have a money hole, just by regard, just to see when it starts changing those premiums.
I'd suggest, let's get it.
Against how much assets we have that we could probably absorb,
Yep.
as long as we don't have them every year.
Yep. I think we'll ask, let's get some scenarios, 500, 1 mil, 2 mil, or something to that effect, so then we know.
See where the premiums were.
Chair, if I could add one more comment. In the work we're doing in the LTP, we're talking about resilience and reserves, and that the ability to have a lot of money for the future unknowns versus having a capacity to pay for it out of another funding resource, like a debt line of credit, for example. So there's an optimum point at which we have cash for reserves, and the balance, if it is 1 in 1,000 year event, could be funded long term by some debt. So that's what I'm referring to, is that finding that point where we have enough cash available versus how you can't save for everything. So knowing how you would cover that, because the excess does, even the insurance policy has a specified limit.
Alan, do you still have a question?
Thanks, Madam Chair. So, first question is, the scenario you outlined where we might be tested the greatest, being an earthquake, that might test our assets the most. That's likely to test the assets of, well, let's say if it was a big event, all of the South Island. If it was the split of the AF8 that occurred, then how well placed is NEMA to deal with something like that? What is the resources of NEMA? Are they reinsured, or are we all sort of trying to look after each other by building up reserves for that big day, hoping that it never comes? So we talked about the reinsurance from Aon being it's a bigger pool, bigger insurance pool. NEMA's carrying 60% of it. They helped us out this time because this was a localised Southland event, but if it was a major earthquake, NEMA going to be saying, we can only give you 10 cents on the dollar because we're broke. So are we better to be a little bit more in Aon's camp than 60% of NEMA if that is a risk that they can't completely pay on a big event, and or at what point is it right to say we should be self-insuring, walk away from insurance? So how much insurance premiums are we paying? Because at some point they will keep on going up to a point where are we better to reinsure and have an asset that's growing to cover the risk? And at that point, I think we're also going to recognise we've invested the reserves, but we don't always give them all the return on those invested reserves. So we're only putting about 2%, are we, of the gains from those reserves into reserves.
Term deposit equivalent. Yeah.
But if we feel that that's the right thing to be doing, as in building up reserves, then it's only reasonable to think that we use the best methods to build those reserves, and therefore all of those gains should accrue to those particular reserves.
I'd like to answer that and say that's all very valid points, and I'd like to suggest that they'll all be covered. I think they need to be covered off in the future, and a piece of work to do on that, because it is a changing and evolving situation.
Thanks, Tony. Finally, Lloyd, before I have my comment.
Yeah, just you raised, Neil, an interesting point about the reserves, and I think going back a little bit, might have been around the YL, we actually went in there and said this is a good opportunity to use reserves, and they wouldn't use them. So maybe there's a question that we need to float. When would these reserves be used, and who would actually stimulate the usage of those reserves? Is it the community through liaison chairs, or is it us saying we're now activating these reserves for this purpose? Because this is what the money was used, was accumulated for by the community on this river or FMU. So I think we'll save the money up for a rainy day, but as we said early on in one other meeting today, today might be the rainy day. We actually need to be prepared to get in there and seriously use those reserves. And I'm not sure if we're in that framework to do that. We want to save it and have somebody else pay. And maybe we need to have that conversation. When this happens, we will be in here and use that money.
And create the principle.
But this is,
When situation happens, we just go back to that principle, not break pipe.
so they need to know when that rainy day comes, that's what's going to be used. And I don't think that's there.
So following on from that, I've heard Tanya mention a review of sorts. So I'm wondering if we need a formal resolution or motion in that regard.
Yes, so if council agrees, we'll commission that piece of work internally and report back to you on the scope of that with a view to answering the questions that have been raised here today and provide guidance and direction going forwards.
Increasingly important work and increasingly confusing. So do we need a motion or just a recommendation, a note in there? Rob, do we need a formal?
So look, in my mind, we do need clarity around, because you could look at this really interesting paper, but actually where's it taking us? So we need to be clear around what's the purpose of the reserves, how do they fit into the overall insurance program, and what's the level they should be pitched at. And should we be rethinking our approach to insurance around, do we self-insure? So wrapped up in that. So that's my idea. Look, it might be useful to add a recommendation that we progress this paper to the next steps around what's the application, what level of insurance do we need, and how does it fit in with our overall, what level of reserves we need, and how does it fit in with our overall insurance program.
Somebody like to move?
I'm happy to move that. I would just add that not only what reserve levels we have, but when and how we access them. I think that's the critical point there. So I'm quite happy to move that we do some further work on this, picking up the conversations that we've had today.
Excellent. Seconder for that motion, please. Councillor Beard, all those in favour? Against, carried, thank you. Right, moving on to the recommendation for that item, which is...
Madam Chair, do you want to accept the report, because this is a report for noting, so what we've got in action, I'd move that we note the report as set out in the papers.
Yes, which is what I was just about to say.
I knew that.
I knew you knew that. Thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Was that what you were waving at before, Councillor Cook? Oh, something else, sorry, beg your pardon.
I have questions about the insurance. What is our premium hang on?
For the forthcoming year, it's 120,000. It's circa 120,000.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just trying to weigh in my mind whether we should be thinking about what Rob suggests we should be self-insuring. I've got a friend who knows an aeroplane and his insurance is 25% of the value. And so he said, if I don't claim for 4 years, I'm winning. So I don't think 120,000 puts us in that area.
No. But I guess the question is, if we do review what that excess is, that means that we're taking on a greater portion of self-insurance. So if we move the excess up to $1 million, then we're essentially self-insuring for $1 million. So it's not all or nothing. There's a piecemeal part in terms of, we can self-insure for more and perhaps reduce the premium. And I think so as part of that piece of work, I think it's asking from our insurers what the scenarios are, how much the premium will vary if we were to change the excess.
In the scheme of things and the amounts of money we're talking about, 120,000 is not a lot of money.
No, it's not.
So if we're going to bring it down to 100,000, we're not actually saving a lot.
No,
That's the Aon component. What's the NEMA component?
Well, no, so NEMA's central government, so we don't pay anything. That's all government money.
The taxation is paid.
Yeah, so it's national emergency. It's the old civil defence. They changed themselves to National Emergency Management Agency. So there is no, I wasn't sure if you understood that. So there is no premium or cost associated with that. So, their ability to fund in a disaster, if it, it's one would hope that they still have the funds to support for an earthquake.
We had an earthquake commission. I thought they were bulletproof. and had so much money that they were embarrassed. And Christchurch took care of their reserves in a day. Yeah.
So we can tease some of the stuff out of this stage. It could well be that we don't take it anywhere, but let's tease it.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to say some of these questions and answers might come up in a workshop around that review, perhaps. So we might, having had that motion moved and passed, we'll move on to item 2. Thank you. Which is the Health, Safety and Wellbeing Management System report. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take the report as read, just save to make a couple of comments. One being that we continue to, I guess, just work on continuously improving our health, safety and wellbeing management system, and that we spread that activity not just over health and safety but also wellbeing, and you know, as I have talked about through the last year, and particularly in light of COVID and the impact thereof, mental health. In terms of last quarter's safety incidents, I would say there's been a potpourri of various things, but intimidation incidents in respect of our people remains a feature, and we've had a couple early in January as well, and we are continuing to work on security and safety systems for our people and responsiveness in respect of these sorts of incidents. And any questions?
Councillor Cook and then Councillor McCallum.
Yeah, just recently I used a council vehicle to go and do a site inspection for a consent. But I couldn't log in because I don't have any sort of code, so was I being tracked?
Oh, okay.
I should have really, for that system to work properly, anyone using the council vehicle should be able to log in.
Also, and have an induction on the floor in the use of the
I didn't crash, I didn't speed.
I don't, that's fine. Well,
well done.
As far as you self-report.
So that was
You can't print it, no.
I was afraid because it was telling me that it was.
Thank you for highlighting that for us. We will get that addressed so we can track you next time.
Councillor McCallum.
Yeah, I thought that was the one that you're missing.
I didn't bring it back.
Couple of things really. I'll start with a simple one. I was looking at your tables and I think the blues are so close, it's very hard to pick up what the, especially on page 22, to pick up the incidents across the, you've got blue and various shades of blue and it's very hard to know what they are.
Which ones they are, okay.
That said, going back a little bit now, I see in here on page 19, you mentioned under 1B a new fleet manager. Now I presume that is part of the role and not a complete FTE?
1B, what's that?
19, page 19.
Page 19.
Yes, that's to chair the group as opposed to it being.
It reads as if it's a new employee,
Yep.
and I presume that was not the case.
That is not the case. So just for clarity, yes, that's for chairing the group.
Going down to 4, third bullet point, there's a comment made there about annual leave, and it came up with the auditors as well. It's probably not the right appropriateness to take that up, but I presume that we are trying to encourage staff to take the annual leave, so our balance for the end of the year is at a sensible level and not a growing level. So I'm really trying to put my spoke in there and saying we can't just sit idly by. We've got to be aggressive on this.
And if I can talk to that, it is something that historically has been picked up in the audit each year, and we have worked very actively. And in fact, at the beginning of last year, it wasn't a feature of the audit report at all, because we've been taking steps over the last 2 or 3 years to actively manage it. What you're seeing is, and we do track it in terms of our HR statistics, and it has increased ever so slightly over the last year, and we very much put that down to the COVID effect. because all of a sudden holidays were cancelled, there was nowhere to go, so people didn't want to go anywhere. We continue to manage that actively and make sure that staff have plans in place to take their leave, and very much pushing the health, safety and wellbeing impact of that. We know that people have come back to work tired and not fully refreshed, because last year was an enormous year. And I would say that's not just true of us here at ES, but more generally speaking. So the message is properly going out about making sure that people take their leave, even if they're not going anywhere, to make sure they rest and recuperate.
So Madam Chair, from our governance level, I'm wondering whether even at the 6-month reporting, we actually got an idea that that's being actively worked on, and I'm looking for at the end of the year that those numbers are less. I'm just asking that we keep the emphasis on it. If we don't, that becomes quite a burden on the balance sheet.
Yeah, it does. Yep.
And I don't think we expect people to come and work for us, but we also expect them to have their free time, and they must take that. That's part of our obligation.
It is.
Are you expecting a detailed figure, or just an indication of whether the numbers are going up or down?
An indication that the work that was highlighted by the auditor is progressing, and we're going to meet our target. I'm not sure what the target is, but there'll be a residual level that is fit for the organisation. And I would expect also that some who have multiple years are looked at as well. I think that's quite a big burden on the organisation as well.
Yep, and like I say, we have the data that we can bring to this meeting.
I think there's a policy under it, but we just make sure that policy is activated.
Don't need to drill down into the gory details,
No,
we just need
we'll make sure
Yep.
it's appropriate, but we have the data.
Chair, can I just add to this conversation that the point of this item was around staff wellbeing and making sure that staff took their leave so they could come back refreshed. We note that we've got to work hard at our leave balances. The focus of this one was around staff wellbeing, not about how we, not the other drivers around making sure we've got a balance sheet issue. So just to make that point, this is very important because, we need to ensure our staff's health and safety is paramount. So that was
Thanks, Rob. I've got Chairman Horrell and then Bruce and Councillor McPhail and now Councillor Cook.
Part of my was covered. It's good to see we're being a bit proactive over the vehicle fleets and people looking in so that maybe we'll have less vehicles going forward. Well, interesting to see the EpiPen one. Will that be in every vehicle, or are you targeting high risk type things?
So this was really in response to staff brought this to us, and this is not for staff who we know have some sort of allergy that might require an EpiPen, because they should be carrying one of those with them already. This was really should staff who weren't aware that they might be allergic for whatever reason go into a high risk area, an area where they might have high risk of getting stung, that we have this as a bookable resource that they can take with them just in case. So they I think there's 3, and they can just log them out from reception when they're going. So it all depends on the risk assessment that they're doing before they're heading out.
That's very good, because we had a child, I don't know how many of them I've brought over the years, but they're quite, I thought if we had 56 of them, it was probably overkill, so that's great.
Thank you. Bruce, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. Just a couple of requests, I guess, or suggestions. When I got down to the bit about the continuous improvement, the health and safety risk, no new hazards. I wondered how often do we review, and you answer that further down, which is annually. Can I just suggest that somewhere it would be quite a good check, you may do that with other regional councils?
Yep.
It just strikes me, to be honest, I read a good number of health and safety reports, and I'm just thinking actually the hazard identification, which is so key, we all do it. It would be useful to check with others. There's nothing here, by the way, that I'm thinking, oh gee, why haven't we got this or that? The other thing is, I don't know why I was doing the same as the previous one, I was looking at the views of the affected parties. Could I suggest, this might even go back to your original item, right at the start. Who was the chair of the Health and Safety Committee to start?
Oh, Michelle Carter, we have a revolving chair for the Health and Safety Committee.
So the suggestion is, would it be possible at one of our meetings to meet?
Sure.
Because it would be helpful, with your leave, obviously, Rob, for us to hear our staff happy with the arrangements.
Yep.
I don't doubt that they are, but it would be just useful, and I think part of the process of this committee to be able to have that. So let's leave it as a suggestion.
Adds value as well, doesn't
I think it does, yes, in the long run.
But just responding outside of that, we know we do survey staff annually through our Waha Kōrero annual employee survey, and how staff feel about health and safety is one of our highest scoring areas. And I'm happy to bring that report to this group as well, just in light of that, but we can get committee member in.
Well, I said there were suggestions. Take that in light of the broader context, which I'm going to be aware of, so I'm quite relaxed. Thank you.
Councillor McFarlane?
Just a quick, just on the intimidation incident, someone was interested to see when that sort of interacting with others. Is it, were they, well, obviously there's been 4, which is a bit more than usual.
Yep.
Were they separate incidents, or just to give me the clarity?
Yep, they were separate incidents. One member of the public got angry at one of our employees when they were on site. We had for traffic management, when we're sampling in the rivers, we need to, if we're on the side of the road, we had a road inspection sign, and they got upset that it was said we were doing road inspections and we were clearly in the rivers. Our challenge around that is, we are governed by traffic management systems, and that's the sign that we're directed to use. One member of the public yelled at another employee in reception. There was a phone incident, and there was an incident on our Facebook page portraying a threat to staff. So again, a variety of incidents.
Councillor Cook?
Just following on, just an additional thought there, what's the staff instruction if they are confronted by somebody on a property? What's the plan?
In public or on the phone?
If they're doing a farm inspection, for instance, and they meet an aggressive occupier.
Our compliance staff are all trained in CERT, and I can't remember what CERT stands for actually, but they're trained to deal with angry members of the public.
De-escalation.
Yeah, and de-escalation techniques. And we sometimes use their skills if we have those situations in reception. For example, the frontline staff have had some training as well in that.
Now, my original
Following on from that, Simon may wish to elaborate on it when he does his presentation around how he deals with it.
Thank you. I think you've got surprised by that, but he'll do it. No, I'll just come back to Councillor McCallum's question about the leave management. I think the question's sort of been answered, but I think we need to make sure that we keep governance and operational matters separated. And although we might have a desire to have details of some of the stuff, it's actually the Chief Executive's responsibility to manage leave balances, and he or she will be judged on that each year.
Thank you. That brings the questions to a conclusion, I think. Somebody like to move that we resolve to note the report. Thank you, Councillor McFarlane. Seconded by Bruce. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Item 3, the annual activity plan.
It's me as well. Just a couple of things to note. The next meeting is not the 17th of February, as indicated in your reports. It's the 24th, and the one on the 30th of June is on the 1st of July, and we've just changed those dates to accommodate availability as I understand it. In terms of this meeting today, the IMSG report, which is scheduled, will be appearing on the 1st of April at the next risk meeting, and Rob will be doing a verbal report on shovel ready, and over the next page in the forward planning, the dross removal as well. And we're currently exploring exactly when we're expecting to receive the reports from RSHL and Great South, and we should hope to have those with you for the next meeting, which is a financial one, mid next month.
Sorry, can you just repeat the February meeting, when was that?
It's the 24th
Not the 17th.
and not the 17th.
Oh, that's on committee day.
To be here on the 24th.
24th.
Yeah, Jan will have put that in.
Well, from July.
Oh, and the other one, the 30th of June is now the 1st of July.
Any questions? Fantastic. Somebody like to move?
I know that.
Thank you,
Can I
councillor McCallum.
suggest just a slight word check? I think we should adopt it rather than just note it. It's ours. It's our, we determine our own work program. I think we should adopt it.
You happy with that, councillor Cook, councillor McCallum?
It's just a change in the wording, it says note in the resolution, but we can change it to adopt.
Yeah, it's up to you, you're moving it. Yes? Great, I think. Councillor McCallum moved it and councillor Cook seconded. Put the motion, all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried, thanks. Okay, I have no extraordinary or urgent business. So I will ask Mel to read the reasons for moving into public excluded, please.
Reasons include to enable council holding the information to carry out without prejudice or disadvantage commercial activities, to prevent the disclosure or use of information for improper gain or advantage, and to protect the privacy of natural persons.
Thank you. For those reasons, somebody like to move us into public excluded. Thank you, councillor Beard, seconded.